Jon Snow stood alone on the edge of the vast, snow-covered plains surrounding Winterfell, his breath visible in the biting cold air as he surveyed the bleak expanse before him. Every inch of that frozen landscape was soaked in history and blood, a silent witness to the struggle that had consumed the North. The enemy he faced was ruthless and cunning. Ramsay Bolton, the twisted usurper who had seized the North through terror and betrayal. Ramsay had the advantage, a greater number of soldiers, knowledge of the terrain, and the merciless brutality that made him feared by many. Yet Jon held something far more powerful, something that Ramsay could never grasp, a loyalty forged not from fear or intimidation, but from genuine respect and unwavering devotion. This was more than a mere battle for a castle. It was a fight to restore honor to a fractured land, to reunite a broken family, and to right the grievous wrongs that had plunged the North into chaos. As Jon prepared to meet Ramsay on the open field, his heart carried the weight of every Stark who had suffered under Bolton's reign. The Battle of Winterfell, as it would come to be known, was one of the most visually stunning and brutally realistic clashes ever portrayed on television. It wasn't just about thousands of armored men locked in mortal combat. It was about the raw human emotion etched on the faces of warriors fighting for their homes, their loved ones, and their very survival. Jon's eyes burned with determination despite the grim reality. His forces were hopelessly outnumbered. Ramsay's army stretched far beyond the horizon, a sea of men ready to crush him beneath their relentless charge. There were no elaborate strategies or clever tricks to level the playing field, just the stark knowledge that Jon was vastly outmatched. Yet he did not hesitate. Without a second thought, he plunged headlong into the chaos, a lone warrior fueled by desperation and fierce love for his homeland. In those frantic moments, Jon's fate seemed sealed. The infamous shield wall of Ramsay's soldiers, known for its impenetrable discipline and cold efficiency, slowly tightened like a vice around Jon's battered forces, suffocating any glimmer of hope. Blood, sweat, and mud mingled in the air, obscuring the boundary between life and death. But Jon fought on, every swing of his sword a testament to his refusal to surrender, every breath a promise to those who had fallen before him. The battle's tactical landscape was shaped by Ramsay's cruel brilliance. Early on, the Bolton Lord exploited Jon's emotional connection to the fight, manipulating him into making rash decisions born of passion rather than cold calculation. Bolton's archers unleashed deadly volleys of arrows, turning the battlefield into a hellscape where survival seemed almost impossible. Jon's troops, loyal but unseasoned for such brutality, were caught off guard by the merciless onslaught. Ramsay's plan was merciless in its simplicity. Bait Jon into a trap, let his emotions cloud his judgment, then crush him with overwhelming force. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, sparks of hope flickered amid the carnage. Jon's unwavering resolve stood as a beacon of defiance. His decision to charge straight into the heart of Ramsay's forces, sword raised high, marked a turning point, not just in the battle, but in his journey as a leader. He embodied the belief that true leadership means standing shoulder to shoulder with your men, not hiding behind the lines. As he rode forward, knowing this might be his final charge, the fury and desperation in his eyes revealed a man willing to sacrifice everything for family, for honor, and for the North itself. While Jon battled amid the chaos, another force was quietly shifting the tide of war from behind the scenes. Sansa Stark, once a naive girl dreaming of knights and castles, had transformed into a shrewd and pragmatic leader. Understanding Ramsay's cruelty and penchant for psychological torment better than anyone, she had summoned the Knights of the Vale to her aid through the influence of Petyr Baelish. This strategic alliance arrived at a crucial moment, shattering the Bolton lines like a thunderous hammer blow and breaking Ramsay's grip on the battlefield. Sansa's role in the victory was nothing short of pivotal. Without the timely intervention of the Vale's cavalry, Jon's forces might have been overwhelmed and annihilated beneath Ramsay's relentless assault. Her evolution, from innocence to cunning strategist, highlighted the varied forms leadership can take. While Jon fought with valor and honor, Sansa wielded intelligence and subtlety, recognizing that survival demanded more than brute strength. The battlefield itself was a chaotic tempest, arrows raining like deadly hailstones, the air thick with the screams of the wounded and the clash of steel. One of the most harrowing moments came when Jon was nearly trampled beneath the throng of dying and dead, swallowed by the merciless tide of war. That desperate struggle for breath, clawing through the suffocating weight of fallen comrades, symbolized not only his physical battle for survival, but his transformation from an outcast bastard into a true leader of men. Visually, the battle was immortalized by one unforgettable image: Jon Snow, standing alone against a charging cavalry, sword in hand, ready to meet his fate. That solitary figure, framed by the thunder of hooves and the roar of battle, captured the essence of his courage, recklessness, and fierce determination. It was a moment etched forever into the hearts and minds of viewers, embodying the spirit of a man who had risen from obscurity to become a beacon of hope. Finally, as the Knights of the Vale thundered into the fray, the tide turned decisively. The Bolton forces, once seemingly invincible, began to crumble beneath the combined strength of Stark and Vale. Ramsay, ever arrogant and overconfident, retreated behind the walls of Winterfell, hoping to weather the storm within its ancient stones. But this time, escape was not an option. Jon, battered and bloodied but unbroken, pursued him with relentless determination, embodying the spirit of a leader unwilling to yield until justice was reclaimed and the North restored. Winterfell, the ancient stronghold and proud ancestral seat of House Stark, had long stood as a symbol of northern resilience and honor. Yet, by the time Jon Snow and his allies set their sights on reclaiming it, the castle lay in ruin, defiled and desecrated by the cruel reign of Ramsay Bolton. The torment inflicted within its walls had left deep scars not just on the stones, but on the spirit of the North itself. Jon's campaign to retake Winterfell was far more than a mere strategic victory on the battlefield. It was a deeply personal conquest, a reclaiming of hope and dignity for a people who had been ravaged by relentless war, betrayal, and heartbreak. The North had been fractured, torn apart by conflict, with families divided and loyalties tested time and again. But in that fateful moment, when the banners of House Stark once more rose over Winterfell's towering battlements, a fragile but powerful healing began to take root. Ramsay Bolton's downfall was steeped in a grim, poetic justice. The man who had thrived on fear, cruelty, and unthinkable cruelty met his end not amidst the chaos of battle, but within the very kennels where he had subjected so many to unspeakable horrors. As his own savage hounds turned on him, tearing into the man who had wielded them as tools of terror, his gruesome death served as a fitting and brutal close to his reign of terror. For Sansa Stark, walking away from that grim scene was more than just survival. It was the triumph of justice. She had outlasted Ramsay's manipulations, outwitted his sadistic traps, and ultimately reclaimed her rightful home, not just for herself, but for the entire North. Meanwhile, Jon Snow's victory was about more than defeating an enemy. It was a defining moment that cemented his role as the true leader of the North. Where once the northern houses had been fractured and disillusioned, they now rallied behind Jon, recognizing him as the rightful heir to Winterfell and the embodiment of their hopes for a united future. This battle was a crucible that tested Jon's resilience, his honor, and his ability to inspire those around him. Standing in Winterfell's great hall, an echoing chamber steeped in the legacy of his ancestors, there was a quiet but profound acknowledgement. The North had found its leader. Yet, as momentous as this victory was, it was only the beginning. The true storm loomed beyond the horizon, the struggle that would determine the fate of all living souls across the realm. For now, though, the North could finally breathe, even if just for a fleeting moment, knowing that Winterfell was once again under the stewardship of House Stark, where it had belonged for centuries. While the battle between Jon Snow and Ramsay Bolton settled the fate of the North on a grand scale, not all conflicts in Westeros are waged on vast battlefields. Sometimes wars unfold in the form of intensely personal duels, where honor, vengeance, and the weight of a house's legacy rest upon just two individuals. Few moments in the saga of Westeros were as gripping or unforgettable as the trial by combat between Oberyn Martell, the charismatic and deadly Viper of Dorne, and Gregor Clegane, known as the Mountain, a towering brute whose very presence inspired terror. Unlike the sprawling armies clashing for Winterfell, this confrontation was an intimate, fierce duel, a spectacle charged with deep personal stakes. Oberyn Martell did not simply fight for Tyrion Lannister's survival. His battle was about justice, about confronting a monster who had haunted him and his family for decades. Years earlier, Gregor Clegane had brutally murdered Oberyn's beloved sister, Alia Martell, in an act of savagery that left scars on the entire Martell family. Oberyn's quest was more than political. It was a mission fueled by a simmering rage and a desperate need for closure. From the moment Oberyn arrived in King's Landing, his sharp wit and magnetic charm masked the dark fire burning beneath the surface. The trial by combat was his chance to finally hold the Mountain accountable for his horrific crimes during Robert's Rebellion. Armed with a spear and unwavering confidence, Oberyn stepped into the arena with a clear purpose: to defeat the Mountain and extract a confession that would lay bare the atrocities committed against his sister and her children. The duel itself was a breathtaking display of contrasts. Oberyn moved with the grace and precision of a dancer, his every strike calculated and deliberate. His agility and speed kept the lumbering Mountain at bay, taunting the beast with both his spear and his sharp tongue. It was a performance of skill and determination, a vivid declaration of Oberyn's quest for justice. For a time, it seemed as though the Viper might emerge victorious. He landed multiple blows, visibly weakening the Mountain, raising the hopes of everyone watching, including Tyrion, whose fate now rested on this fight. But Oberyn's quest for a confession, his demand that Gregor admit to his crimes, blinded him to the danger that still loomed. In a devastating turn of events, as Oberyn pressed too close for his final strike, the Mountain seized his chance. With a terrifying surge of strength, seemingly defying his wounds, Gregor grabbed Oberyn and, in one brutal, heart-stopping moment, crushed his skull with his bare hands. The arena fell silent, the cheers turning into gasps as the Viper was silenced forever. This moment shattered more than just Oberyn's body. It crushed the fragile hope Tyrion had clung to. The death of the Viper was a grim reminder of Westeros' brutal, unforgiving nature. A world where even the most skilled and righteous can be undone in an instant by sheer brutality. The reverberations of this duel echoed far beyond the arena. For House Martell, Oberyn's loss was a tragedy that inflamed the simmering tensions between Dorne and the Iron Throne. His daughters, the fiercely determined Sand Snakes, inherited their father's relentless thirst for vengeance, setting Dorne on a path that would intertwine deeply with the realm's greater conflicts. As for Gregor Clegane, victory came at a terrible cost. The venom from Oberyn's poisoned spear coursed through his veins, leading to a slow and agonizing decline into near death. His resurrection, twisted and monstrous, transformed him from a fearsome warrior into a mindless servant of Cersei Lannister, a shell of a man, stripped of his humanity and reduced to a terrifying beast. In this way, the Mountain's story became one of tragic loss and horror, a man consumed by violence even as it destroyed him from within. Looking back, the duel between Oberyn Martell and the Mountain was far more than a trial by combat. It was a defining moment that shifted power and shaped the fate of Westeros. It highlighted the fragile balance between life and death, the perils of underestimating one's opponent, and the heavy price of allowing vengeance to cloud one's judgment. Oberyn possessed the skill, passion, and motivation to win, yet it was his desperate need for a final confession that led to his downfall. In the harsh and unforgiving world of Westeros, where betrayal and brutality often overshadow honor and justice, this moment remains a powerful testament to the tragic cost of vengeance. Oberyn Martell's fall stands as a stark and poignant reminder that even the most righteous and just causes can be undone in the relentless pursuit of justice. His death was more than just the loss of a single man or a noble house. It marked the shattering of an ideal, the powerful belief that one determined individual could rise, face tyranny head-on, and emerge victorious. Oberyn's cause was noble, fueled by a passionate desire to expose truth and bring accountability to those who wielded unchecked power. Yet, despite the strength of his conviction and skill, nobility alone proved insufficient in the brutal world of Westeros. As we transition from the savage and chaotic battle at Winterfell to the unforgettable and intensely personal duel between Oberyn and Gregor Clegane, known as the Mountain, we witness the many faces of warfare in this unforgiving realm. Sometimes the fate of kingdoms is determined by vast armies clashing on battlefields, their banners flying high amid the roar of war. Other times, it comes down to a solitary figure, standing tall against insurmountable odds, embodying hope, courage, and defiance. Whether fought with swords or sheer willpower, the reverberations of these battles echo far beyond the immediate violence, shaping the political landscape of Westeros and altering the lives of countless souls within it. Though Oberyn the Viper was ultimately struck down, his spirit and relentless quest for justice did not perish with him. His legacy endured in the hearts of those who knew him, and those inspired by his unwavering stand against oppression and corruption. The trial by combat he engaged in was not merely a fight to the death. It was a profound moment that left a lasting imprint on Tyrion Lannister, a man whose own journey would soon lead him to his moment of true glory. That glory arrived during one of the most defining episodes of Game of Thrones, the Battle of Blackwater Bay. Unlike Oberyn's deeply personal and tragic duel, this was a colossal, large-scale confrontation that would determine the fate of King's Landing, and by extension, the Iron Throne itself. Tyrion Lannister, often underestimated and mocked by many, stepped into this critical moment with a cunning and leadership that defied expectations. His sharp intellect and strategic mind shone brightly amid the chaos, proving his worth not only to his family but to the very survival of the city. The threat came in the form of Stannis Baratheon, a man driven by an unshakable resolve and an unwavering belief in the righteousness of his claim to the throne. Stannis was no mere pretender. He was a man deeply convinced that the Iron Throne belonged to him by right. With a disciplined and powerful army led by his loyal hand, Sir Davos Seaworth, a former smuggler whose honor and loyalty were unmatched, Stannis marched resolutely on King's Landing. His forces were stronger, well-trained, and poised to overwhelm the city's defenses. What Stannis failed to anticipate was Tyrion's brilliance. While many within King's Landing, including members of Tyrion's own family, doubted his abilities, Tyrion seized the moment to demonstrate just how formidable he could be. Unlike the brute strength of Gregor Clegane or the rigid determination of Stannis, Tyrion wielded his sharp mind as his greatest weapon. Recognizing that King's Landing simply lacked the manpower for a conventional defense, he instead relied on an unpredictable and devastating force: wildfire. Wildfire was a deadly, volatile substance, a green liquid capable of causing catastrophic destruction. Its use was fraught with risk, as it could just as easily annihilate the city itself as the invading fleet. Yet Tyrion understood its potential to turn the tide of battle. His daring plan was to lure Stannis' fleet into Blackwater Bay and unleash this fiery inferno upon them, transforming the waters into a blazing trap. The gamble was immense, but when the wildfire ignited, it erupted into a spectacular and terrifying wall of green flame, engulfing ships and men alike in a terrifying blaze. This moment became one of the most visually and emotionally unforgettable in the entire saga. What had seemed like an assured victory for Stannis dissolved into chaos and destruction. His navy was shattered, scattered, and vulnerable, leaving the way open for King's Landing's defenders to rally and fight back. Sir Davos Seaworth's role in the battle, though less dramatic than the explosion of wildfire, was no less vital. Loyal to Stannis despite their differences, Davos had long served as his steadfast advisor and right hand. But the devastating power of Tyrion's plan came at a terrible personal cost. As wildfire consumed one of Stannis' ships, Davos lost his son in the flames, a profound loss that cast a long shadow over the remainder of his story. In this tangled web of war, ambition, and sacrifice, the battles, whether fought on sprawling fields or in quiet moments of resolve, left deep and lasting scars. The clash between Oberyn Martell and the Mountain, the fiery trial by combat, the monumental Battle of Blackwater Bay, and the personal tragedies that unfolded within them all remind us of the brutal complexity of power and justice in Westeros. Every confrontation reshapes the realm, every loss echoes through time, and every legacy is carried forward by those who survive to tell the tale. The Battle of Blackwater Bay was far more than just a clash of armies. It was a moment that fractured loyalties and reshaped the destinies of those involved. Stannis Baratheon, once a steadfast claimant to the Iron Throne, saw his forces utterly crushed in a fiery inferno that engulfed the waters of the bay. But beyond the military defeat, the battle carved a deep rift in his relationship with Sir Davos Seaworth, one of the few men whose loyalty remained unshaken despite the relentless hardships they faced together. Their bond, forged through trials and unwavering commitment, was tested like never before amid the chaos and smoke of Blackwater. Meanwhile, in the heart of King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister's role transcended the infamous wildfire trap that engulfed Stannis' fleet. While the so-called King Joffrey Baratheon shrank from the front lines, paralyzed by fear and cowardice, it was Tyrion who emerged as the true commander of the city's defenses. His leadership during this pivotal battle revealed a hidden facet of his character, far removed from the cunning schemer or the sharp-tongued outcast that many had come to expect. Here was a man stepping into the light as a resolute leader, one whose sharp mind and indomitable spirit could rally men to hold their ground when everything seemed lost. Standing atop the walls, Tyrion delivered a stirring speech to the weary soldiers defending King's Landing. He reminded them, with raw urgency, that their survival and the survival of their families depended on their courage and unity. This rare moment of heroism, a stark contrast to his usual role as the Lannisters' political chess piece, solidified Tyrion as an indispensable force within Westeros' brutal and unforgiving power struggles. Yet even as victory was claimed, the triumph was bittersweet. Tywin Lannister, arriving with reinforcements at the battle's final moments, took the lion's share of the credit, basking in the glory that rightfully belonged to Tyrion, the mastermind behind the city's salvation. In the aftermath, Tyrion's near-fatal encounter with Sir Mandon Moore, an act of treachery likely orchestrated by Joffrey or Cersei, left him physically disfigured and emotionally isolated. The scars he bore were not just skin-deep. They marked the beginning of his deep disillusionment with his own family and his place within the Lannister dynasty. For Stannis, the Battle of Blackwater Bay was a crushing setback. His campaign to claim the throne lay in ruins. His forces shattered and his confidence rattled, but his resolve, steeled by an unyielding sense of duty, remained unbroken. Despite the devastation, Stannis pressed onward, driven by a vision of justice and order that few could comprehend. The bond between Stannis and Davos endured, even as the shadow of Blackwater loomed large. Davos, unwavering in his loyalty, continued to serve his lord even as Stannis' decisions grew more desperate and morally ambiguous. The battle itself was more than a mere military engagement. It was a turning point that illuminated the fragile nature of power in Westeros. Stannis, embodying righteousness and strength, was brought low by a single stroke of strategic brilliance. Tyrion's intellect, not Tywin's armies, had saved King's Landing from obliteration. As the smoke cleared over Blackwater Bay, the reverberations of the conflict echoed through the political and military landscapes of Westeros. Tyrion's scars, both visible and hidden, propelled him to seek new paths, while Stannis, unbowed, continued his relentless march toward destiny. For the citizens of King's Landing, the haunting image of green wildfire lighting the night sky would forever be etched in their memories as the night they narrowly escaped annihilation. Yet, as momentous as the Battle of Blackwater Bay was, it was but a prelude to an even greater terror looming on the horizon, the Long Night. This was a horror unlike any Westeros had faced before, where the dead themselves marched under the command of the Night King. It was a war not fought over thrones or honor, but a desperate struggle for survival. The stakes were higher than ever. Winterfell, the ancient stronghold of the North, was transformed into humanity's final bastion. Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen united their forces, the steadfast Northmen, the disciplined Unsullied, the fierce Dothraki, and 2 living dragons, in a desperate gambit to halt the Night King's unstoppable army. They prepared for war, but no training or strategy could truly brace them for what was coming. The enemy was a force of nature, relentless, merciless, and devoid of fear or fatigue. The Night King's strategy was chillingly simple: overwhelm and destroy by attrition. His endless hordes of whites crashed against Winterfell's defenses like a relentless tidal wave, threatening to drown the living in a sea of death. The battle unfolded in the blackness of night, where every scream, clash of steel, and cold breath whispered of doom. At the center of this nightmare stood Jon and Daenerys, each riding their dragons into the fiery chaos, hoping their flames could turn the tide. But the Night King had anticipated their every move. His icy storm blotted out the skies, blinding the dragons and rendering their fiery assaults nearly useless. From the outset, it was clear this was no ordinary battle. It was a war against death itself, and the living were losing ground. Amid the chaos, key moments defined the battle's heart. Theon Greyjoy, once a betrayer of the Starks, found his redemption on the very soil he had once forsaken. Charged with protecting Bran Stark, the three-eyed raven and the realm's last hope, Theon stood his ground against the Night King's forces. Fully aware that this would be his final stand, he fought not for glory, but for honor. His death was inevitable, yet it was a sacrifice that granted precious seconds for Bran to survive, delaying the inevitable approach of the Night King and the darkness he commanded. This battle, marked by courage, loss, and the raw terror of facing the unknown, would forever change the fate of Westeros. The memory of those frozen, flame-lit nights, of dragons struggling against the storm and warriors making their last stands, would be carried in the hearts of the living as a testament to humanity's will to survive against the most impossible odds. Melisandre's prophecy, a thread woven subtly throughout the sprawling saga, reached its poignant culmination in a moment both haunting and hopeful. The enigmatic Red Woman had long foreseen the encroaching darkness, a shadow looming over the land like a suffocating storm. Her arrival at Winterfell was not just a mere presence, but a beacon, a flicker of fragile hope in the face of overwhelming despair. With deliberate ceremony, she ignited the swords of the Dothraki warriors, their blades transformed into flickering tongues of flame that cut through the night's oppressive blackness. This stunning spectacle, brief but unforgettable, embodied the fierce defiance of the living as they charged toward the seemingly endless night. Yet, like a candle caught in a sudden gust, the flames quickly vanished, swallowed by the merciless advance of the dead. But Melisandre's greatest gift was not the fire she wielded, nor the momentary blaze of courage she sparked. It was the whispered prophecy she shared with Arya Stark. That quiet moment, almost overlooked amid the chaos, served as a powerful reminder that Arya's path had been leading her inexorably to this very juncture. From the innocent dreams of a young girl longing for knighthood to her transformation into a lethal assassin under the tutelage of the Faceless Men, Arya's journey was a testament to change, resilience, and destiny. By the time the Battle of Winterfell raged with a fury unlike any other, Arya had become one of the most formidable figures in Westeros, her skills honed in shadows, silent, and deadly. As hope waned and the living faltered under the relentless assault of the Night King's army, Arya vanished into the darkness, unseen and unheard, a wraith amidst the chaos. Then, in a moment that felt both sudden and inevitable, she struck. With a swift, breathtaking movement, Arya plunged her Valyrian steel dagger into the Night King's heart. The impact shattered him instantly, and with him the vast horde of undead he commanded crumbled to lifelessness. Their dark magic dissipated as quickly as their master fell. The death of the Night King was a turning point that changed the course of the battle and the fate of all who lived. Yet, victory came at a terrible price. The battlefield was strewn with the bodies of both the living and the dead, a grim reminder of the cost of survival. Winterfell itself bore deep scars, nearly destroyed by the carnage. Beyond the immediate relief of victory, the defeat of the Night King echoed with profound implications. For years, he had been the looming existential threat, the ultimate embodiment of death and oblivion. His fall should have been a triumphant closure, yet it left a hollow truth hanging in the air. The war for the Iron Throne would persist, unyielding and ruthless. The unity that had briefly united all of Westeros against the common enemy began to crumble, fractured by old rivalries and new ambitions. Moreover, the defeat rekindled the mystery surrounding the Night King's origins. Who was he, truly? The series hinted at a tragic past, a man transformed into a weapon by the ancient children of the forest. But why did he choose this moment to march against the living? Was he driven by vengeance, or was he a mere force of nature, an agent of death beyond motive or reason? These questions lingered in the minds of survivors and viewers alike, underscoring the enigmatic nature of the threat they had just overcome. For Arya Stark, the act of killing the Night King was not just a pivotal moment in the battle, it was the defining chapter of her legacy. She had spent years honing her deadly craft, initially motivated by a thirst for revenge against those who had shattered her family. But in that decisive act, she transcended personal vengeance. Arya became a hero not for her own glory, but for the survival of all humankind. The Long Night was more than a clash of armies. It was a test of human endurance, spirit, and hope against the shadow of annihilation. As dawn finally broke over the battered walls of Winterfell, the survivors rose, weary but alive, bearing witness to the price of survival and the fragile nature of peace. They had faced the ultimate enemy and emerged victorious, but they knew, deep in their bones, that the hardest battles still lay ahead. With the undead threat vanquished, the living now turned their gaze back to the ceaseless Game of Thrones, where honor, loyalty, and even life itself hung by threads just as fragile and precarious as ever. Before the cold and relentless terror of the Long Night ever descended upon the realm, a fierce and fiery battle unfolded, one so intense and transformative that it irrevocably altered the course of the war in a single violent sweep. This was the ambush on the Gold Road, a confrontation unlike anything Westeros had witnessed in generations. On this day, the old conventions of warfare were obliterated, as if consumed by the very flames that roared across the battlefield. The sun hung mercilessly high in the sky, casting harsh light onto the dusty, well-worn path where a triumphant army marched homeward, carrying the spoils of their recent victories. Clad in shining armor and burdened with gold and supplies, the soldiers believed themselves safely on the road to home, secure and unchallenged. At the head of this procession was Jaime Lannister, known to many as the Kingslayer. Fresh from a hard-fought victory, Jaime bore not only the physical weight of his battle armor, but also the immense mental burden of his family's future, the throne they had struggled so fiercely to secure, and the crushing pressure of winning a war that seemed endless. But Jaime, like everyone else, was blind to the storm about to be unleashed upon them, a storm not of weather, but of fire. Unbeknownst to the marching soldiers, a pair of watchful eyes looked down from the sky. Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, had arrived at a pivotal moment in her campaign to reclaim the throne her ancestors once ruled. Across the sea, she had come with determination. Yet as her allies thinned and her support faltered, she faced mounting pressure to prove herself. No longer content to abide by the old rules of warfare, Daenerys was poised to reveal to Westeros the terrifying power of dragons. Mounted atop her trusted dragon, Drogon, Daenerys soared above the Gold Road, her heart ablaze with a mixture of fury and resolute purpose. Before her lay the men who had supported the throne that had stolen everything from her family. But this was more than vengeance. It was a demonstration of raw power, a declaration meant to remind the realm who truly wielded dominion over fire and blood. Her advisors, Tyrion Lannister and Jon Snow, had cautioned restraint in earlier battles, urging prudence and warning against needless destruction. Yet, as Daenerys surveyed the enemy below, the heat of the moment consumed her resolve. With a fierce command, she unleashed Drogon's wrath. What followed was a scene from the oldest, most terrifying legends, a spectacle of fire and fury unseen in centuries. In an instant, the orderly march dissolved into chaos. Drogon descended like a living tempest, his thunderous roar heralding a wave of fire that tore through the soldiers' ranks. The earth trembled beneath the onslaught, and the screams of men echoed over the roaring blaze as the dragon's fire transformed the landscape into a searing inferno. Wagons laden with food, gold, and vital supplies meant to sustain the war effort were reduced to smoldering ash within moments. Soldiers, many unprepared for an enemy so elemental and overwhelming, descended into panic. Their training was useless against this merciless force of nature. At the forefront, Jaime Lannister could do nothing but watch in horror as the flames engulfed his men. The Golden Lion of Lannister, a herald of power and prestige, stood powerless against the ancient might of a dragon. For Jaime, this battle was more than a clash of armies. It was a reckoning. He had faced countless foes across the realm, surviving wars and sieges that tested every ounce of his skill and courage, yet nothing had prepared him for this. The weight of his armor paled in comparison to the crushing burden of witnessing his loyal soldiers consumed by fire in an instant. The war was evolving, and Jaime knew that unless they adapted quickly, everything his family had fought for would be lost. But he was no man to yield quietly to fate. With a courage bordering on recklessness, Jaime seized his lance and charged toward the source of the destruction, determined to strike back against the unstoppable force before him. He knew the charge was suicidal, riding headlong into fire and a creature of myth, but Jaime had never been one to shy away from impossible odds. In his mind, he was the Kingslayer, the man who had once saved King's Landing from flames. Now, he hoped to do so again, even if it meant sacrificing his life. As Jaime pressed forward, another figure sprang into action. Bronn, the sellsword known for his quick wit and sharp instincts, spotted Drogon and realized brute strength alone would not win the day. This battle demanded cunning and precision. His gaze fixed on the massive scorpion, a siege weapon designed to bring down dragons. Without hesitation, Bronn loaded a colossal bolt, aimed carefully, and fired. The bolt struck true, piercing Drogon's scales. For a moment, hope flickered, a sign that the impossible might be within reach. Drogon let out a pained screech, wounded but far from defeated. Though staggered, the dragon veered off course only briefly. His fiery breath continued to wreak devastation below. Seizing the moment, Jaime charged again, lance aimed directly at Daenerys herself. For a brief, fleeting instant, the Mother of Dragons was vulnerable within his grasp, but fate intervened cruelly. Jaime's horse stumbled, pulled under the riverbank, and he found himself dragged beneath the dark waters. The promise of glory turned swiftly into a fight for survival as the Kingslayer sank beneath the surface, weighed down by his armor, uncertain if he would ever rise again. As the flames died down and the survivors gathered their shattered strength, the psychological toll of the battle was clear. Those who lived had seen what few had ever witnessed before, the true power of dragons. Their comrades lay incinerated, their supplies lost, and their morale shattered beyond repair. This battle was more than a loss of men or gold. It was a lesson in fear, an enduring dread that haunted soldiers and commanders long after the last fire flickered out. For Daenerys, the ambush marked a turning point. The devastation wrought by Drogon had shifted momentum decisively in her favor, proving to the world the terrifying potential she commanded. Yet it also raised sobering questions. The dragon had been wounded, a reminder that even immense power had its limits. The path ahead promised new and daunting challenges. On the other side, Jaime, having narrowly escaped death, was left to confront the harsh reality of what had transpired. His bravery had been undeniable, but it had nearly cost him everything. Now he grasped the true scale of his enemy's might. This battle had revealed an unvarnished truth. The war for the throne could no longer be won by sheer force or traditional strategy alone. The rules had changed, and with them, the entire landscape of conflict was transformed forever. Long before dragons soared once again, unleashing fiery devastation upon armies, and long before the dead began to rise ominously from the northern lands, Westeros was already embroiled in a war of epic proportions, one that would alter the very fabric of the realm for generations to come. This was Robert's Rebellion, a fierce and transformative conflict that culminated in a legendary battle at the crossing of the Trident, a key river in the heart of the continent. It was here, amidst the crashing waters and clashing steel, that two of Westeros's most iconic figures faced off: Robert Baratheon, known as the Stag, and Rhaegar Targaryen, the Dragon Prince. The seeds of this confrontation had been sown over many years through simmering tensions, betrayals, and grievances that festered beneath the surface of the realm's fragile peace. At its core, Robert's Rebellion was framed as a rebellion against the oppressive and ancient Targaryen dynasty, rulers of Westeros for nearly 3 centuries. Yet, beneath the surface, this war was fueled by something far more personal and heart-wrenching. Robert Baratheon was not merely fighting for the fate of the realm. He was fighting for love, for honor, and for the woman he believed had been cruelly taken from him. Lyanna Stark, the woman Robert had been pledged to marry, had been abducted by Rhaegar Targaryen. This was no simple political kidnapping. To Robert, it was a devastating wound to his heart and pride, a betrayal that ignited a firestorm of fury within him. With his massive warhammer gripped tightly in his hands and a rage unmatched by any other warrior in Westeros, Robert marched to end the Targaryen reign once and for all. As Robert rallied his forces, others answered the call to arms, but none were more significant than his lifelong friend and steadfast ally, Eddard Stark, better known as Ned Stark. The bond between these two men was forged in the crucible of rebellion, built on loyalty, honor, and brotherhood. Ned Stark, too, had deeply personal reasons for joining the fight. His sister Lyanna's disappearance was a scar on his family's legacy, and justice demanded retribution. Together, Robert and Ned became the twin pillars of a movement that would shake the very foundations of the Targaryen dynasty. Across the battlefield stood Rhaegar Targaryen, a prince revered for his nobility, intelligence, and charm, yet burdened by the choices that had led to this war. Unlike his father, King Aerys II, who was driven by madness and cruelty, Rhaegar was seen by many as a man destined for greatness, a ruler with a vision for a different Westeros. However, his controversial actions, especially the abduction of Lyanna Stark, had set the realm ablaze with rebellion and unrest. Now on the banks of the Trident, Rhaegar faced the consequences of his decisions. The stakes of this battle were monumental. Whoever emerged victorious would decide the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. If Rhaegar triumphed, Robert's rebellion would be crushed, and the Targaryens' 300-year reign would continue. But if Robert won, the dynasty of fire and blood would fall, and a new era would begin. The battle itself was nothing short of brutal, a chaotic storm of clashing steel, blood, and thunderous war cries. The Trident, once a tranquil river crossing, became a symbol of war and destiny, a place where history's currents met, and where the future of Westeros hung by a fragile thread. Every soldier on both sides understood the gravity of this fight, but it was the fateful duel between Robert and Rhaegar that would echo through the ages. Robert Baratheon was a towering, powerful warrior, born for battle. His enormous warhammer was not only a deadly weapon, but also a symbol of his raw strength and relentless spirit. As he charged forward, his fury radiated like an unstoppable force, a storm of vengeance born from love and loss. Opposite him stood Rhaegar Targaryen, clad in shining armor and wielding his legendary sword Dawn, a blade said to be forged from a fallen star. Two men, so different in demeanor and destiny, met in the heart of chaos, their confrontation shaping the fate of the realm. Their duel transcended mere combat. It was a symbolic battle between the old and the new. Robert embodied the rebellious spirit of the people, a force rising from the ashes to claim justice and freedom. Rhaegar, meanwhile, was the last hope of the ancient Targaryen line, a prince whose promise had captivated many but whose choices had sparked ruin. In the end, it was Robert's sheer strength and unyielding determination that prevailed. With a thunderous swing of his warhammer, he struck Rhaegar down. The impact shattered the prince's chest, and as Rhaegar collapsed, the rubies adorning his armor scattered and tumbled into the river's currents, their deep red hues mixing with the blood of the fallen. This poignant image became a lasting symbol. More than just the death of a prince, it marked the end of an era. The fall of Rhaegar signified the collapse of the Targaryen dynasty, the dynasty that had ruled Westeros with dragons for generations. In that moment, the dragon died. With it, the last flicker of hope for Targaryen rule was swept away by the rushing waters of the Trident. Yet the consequences of this battle rippled far beyond the immediate aftermath. With Rhaegar dead, Robert's path to the Iron Throne was clear. His rebellion had succeeded, and soon he would be crowned King of Westeros, inaugurating the Baratheon dynasty. The realm, long defined by the fierce legacy of fire and blood, now faced the rule of Robert, a king as fierce and flawed as the war that had brought him to power. But while Robert claimed victory on the battlefield, the shadows of the past lingered. Rhaegar's death left questions that would haunt Westeros for decades. The truth behind Lyanna Stark's abduction, long cloaked in secrecy, would one day unravel, threatening to tear apart everything Robert had fought to achieve. The Targaryens, though defeated, were far from vanished. Across the narrow sea, Rhaegar's surviving children grew up unaware of the legacy they would one day reclaim. Their rightful place on the throne lost to war, but never forgotten. For Ned Stark, the aftermath of the rebellion was bittersweet. He had fought side by side with Robert, his brother-in-arms, helping to topple a dynasty and reshape the realm. Yet the victory came at a great cost. The scars of war and loss would remain, a solemn reminder that the fight for justice and honor is never without sacrifice. The rebellion had claimed countless lives, and among them was Rhaegar Targaryen, the last dragon prince. Though his deeds and choices in the war were complex and sometimes contested, the impact he left on the collective memory of the realm was undeniable. On the banks of the Trident, Ned Stark stood silently, watching the last glimmers of the Dragon Prince's famed rubies, the gems that had once adorned Rhaegar's armor, slowly disappear beneath the rushing waters. It was a moment heavy with the weight of history and loss. Though the battle itself was a decisive victory for Robert's forces, it irrevocably altered the course of the realm's future. In the years that followed, the Battle of the Trident became more than a mere historical event. It transformed into legend. Minstrels composed ballads recounting the fierce duel between Robert Baratheon and Rhaegar Targaryen, capturing the fiery intensity and tragic fate of the young prince. Tales of Rhaegar's rubies, scattered like stars along the riverbed, were whispered to children all across Westeros, a reminder of the fallen prince whose life and death shaped the destiny of the kingdom. For those who lived through it, however, the battle was not just a tale for songs. It was the pivotal turning point that redefined their lives and the fate of the land itself. Robert Baratheon, once a warrior driven by fire and vengeance, would rise from the ashes of rebellion to claim the Iron Throne. But he soon learned that ruling was a far more complicated and grueling task than rebellion ever was. Meanwhile, Ned Stark, bound by unyielding honor and duty, returned to the north carrying the heavy burden of the past. The memory of Rhaegar, the last dragon prince, lingered on, casting a shadow that shaped the realm's future in ways few could foresee. Before the chaos of the War of the Five Kings engulfed Westeros, the battlefields were arenas of strategic mastery and shifting loyalties. One of the earliest and most critical clashes during this turbulent time was the Battle of the Green Fork. Though often overshadowed by more famous battles, it showcased Robb Stark's burgeoning brilliance as a commander and marked a turning point in the conflict. What unfolded on that battlefield was far more than a clash of armies. It was a carefully calculated gambit by Robb Stark, who sought to seize control of the war's momentum and secure a vital advantage for the North. At this juncture in the war, the young Stark Lord had much to prove. Barely a man, he had assumed leadership following the imprisonment of his father, Ned Stark, in King's Landing. The North, weary and wary, looked to Robb with hope, their faith pinned on his ability to protect their lands and seek justice. But Robb was not merely fighting to uphold honor. He was fighting to win. Victory would demand not only bravery, but cunning and strategy. His opponent on the field was none other than Tywin Lannister, the cold, calculating patriarch renowned for his military genius and ruthless resolve. Tywin's forces far outnumbered Robb's, equipped and ready to crush the rebellion with overwhelming power. Robb understood that a direct confrontation would be folly. The North's smaller, loyal forces could not hope to match the Lannisters in sheer strength. Instead, they needed guile and surprise. In a bold and risky maneuver, Robb divided his army, a decision that simultaneously weakened his main force and provided an opportunity to deceive his adversary. He dispatched Rose Bolton with a decoy army to engage Tywin's troops at the Green Fork, a feint designed to distract and lure the Lannisters away from the true battlefield. While Tywin's gaze was fixed on this false engagement, Robb led the bulk of his forces in a surprise attack on Jaime Lannister's camp near River Run, striking where least expected. The battle itself was brutal and chaotic. The Lannisters, confident in their numerical advantage, marched onto the field expecting swift victory. Tywin, ever the tactician, believed he was on the verge of crushing the northern forces with a single decisive blow. Yet the army before him was only a fragment of Robb's true strength. As steel clashed and blood was spilled, the battlefield descended into a violent melee, with neither side able to claim a clear upper hand. Amid this maelstrom stood Tyrion Lannister, Tywin's youngest son, a man more known for his sharp wit than his skill with a sword. Reluctantly thrust into the war, Tyrion found himself far from the comforts and intrigues of court life, thrown into the unforgiving chaos of combat. Armed with little more than rudimentary knowledge of warfare and riding alongside wild hill tribesmen he had recruited, Tyrion's role was not one of glory, but survival. Determined not to die a coward, he threw himself into the fray with fierce resolve. Yet fate, or perhaps luck, had other plans. Amid the chaos, a savage blow struck Tyrion, knocking him unconscious before he could fully grasp what had happened. For all his cleverness and courage, Tyrion's involvement in the Battle of the Green Fork ended not in triumph, but in a haze of blood and unconsciousness, an ignoble pause in a war that would shape the fate of Westeros for years to come. Meanwhile, as Tywin Lannister's forces clashed fiercely at the Green Fork, a much deeper and more cunning plan was quietly unfolding under the command of Robb Stark. While Tywin was fully absorbed in the brutal skirmish, Robb was carefully setting the stage for a bold and decisive strike that would change the course of the war entirely. His true target was not Tywin himself, but Jaime Lannister's camp, where the Kingslayer, renowned for his unmatched swordsmanship, was stationed, unsuspecting and vulnerable. Robb's forces, moving swiftly and with overwhelming numbers, caught Jaime completely off guard. Despite Jaime's extraordinary skill in battle, the element of surprise combined with the sheer force of Robb's army proved too much to overcome. In a sudden and ruthless assault, Robb managed to capture Jaime Lannister, securing one of the most valuable and strategically significant prisoners of the entire War of the Five Kings. This event marked a pivotal turning point. Jaime was not only a master swordsman, but also the eldest son of the powerful Tywin Lannister, the head of one of the richest and most influential houses in the realm. His capture sent shockwaves through the Lannister camp and exposed vulnerabilities they had never before revealed. For Robb Stark, this victory was monumental. It elevated his status from a mere contender to a genuine threat to the throne, and it gave him considerable leverage in any future negotiations involving his prized captive. Tywin, despite his reputation for brilliance and tactical genius, had been outmaneuvered by a young lord barely into his 20s. The diversion at the Green Fork had succeeded perfectly, drawing Tywin's attention and forces away from Jaime's camp, allowing Robb to strike where it counted most. The loss of Jaime Lannister was a devastating blow that forced Tywin to reconsider his strategies and acknowledge that his enemies in the north were far more formidable than he had initially thought. In the aftermath, the impact of Robb's victory rippled throughout the war. Momentum shifted decisively toward the north, while the Lannisters, despite their wealth and influence, found themselves pushed onto the defensive. Robb's decision to divide his forces had been risky, but it paid off spectacularly, enhancing his reputation as a brilliant tactician. For the first time, it seemed the Starks had a real shot at winning the war. The battle at the Green Fork also carried personal consequences for the key players involved. Tyrion Lannister, though knocked unconscious during the fighting, survived, his narrow escape serving as a humbling reminder of the perils even the clever and cunning face in a world ruled by steel and bloodshed. For Tywin, the loss of his son was a bitter blow that compelled him to tighten his hold on his remaining forces, while Robb, despite his triumph, understood that this victory was but the beginning of a long and grueling war. Greater challenges awaited him on the horizon. This battle was not just a fight for territory or prisoners. It marked the start of a brutal, drawn-out conflict where alliances would be made and broken, betrayals would unfold, and rivers of blood would stain the land. On that day at the Green Fork, Robb Stark proved to the realm that even a young wolf could outsmart and outmaneuver the mighty lion. Far across the seas and centuries later, in the fiery world of House Targaryen, another brutal conflict unfolded during the Dance of the Dragons, a bloody civil war that tore the Targaryen dynasty apart. At its heart was the Battle of the Bastion of Duskendale, one of the most savage and decisive confrontations in this war of succession. Here, forces loyal to Rhaenyra Targaryen clashed with those supporting her half-brother Aegon II in a violent struggle that would shape the future of their dynasty and change the very land beneath their feet. Duskendale, a coastal fortress in the Crownlands near King's Landing, had long been a strategic gem. Controlling it meant holding a key to the capital and the surrounding territories. For Rhaenyra, who had declared herself the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, seizing Duskendale was essential to solidify her grip on the capital's outskirts and to sever crucial supply lines feeding Aegon II's forces. Conversely, Aegon II understood that losing this stronghold would cripple his claim, making Duskendale a bitterly contested flashpoint. But this battle was unlike any other. It was a war of dragons, where the sky itself became a battleground. Fire and blood dominated the battlefield as these magnificent beasts unleashed destruction from above. Lord Darren of Duskendale, a staunch supporter of Rhaenyra's claim, led the defense with fierce loyalty, fully aware that surrender would mean more than just a lost fortress. It would shatter the morale of the Black faction and deal a fatal blow to their cause. The clash quickly escalated into one of the bloodiest and most chaotic engagements of the Dance of the Dragons. Aegon Thicke's commanders pressed relentless assaults on the bastion, while Darren's defenders fought desperately against the overwhelming odds. Heavy casualties mounted on both sides, but the tide of destruction truly turned when dragons entered the fray. Dragons, the ultimate weapons of the Targaryen wars, brought devastation on an unimaginable scale. Rhaenyra's forces commanded several dragons capable of raining fire and death, but Aegon II's faction had dragons of their own. When these enormous creatures collided in the skies above Duskendale, the air ignited in a hellish inferno. Flames engulfed the landscape, turning forests to ash and walls to rubble, transforming the battle into a scene of apocalyptic chaos. This fierce contest was not just about soldiers or castles, but about legacy, power, and survival. The Battle of the Bastion of Duskendale reshaped the destiny of the Targaryen dynasty, illustrating the terrifying might of dragons and the devastating cost of civil war. It was a brutal reminder that in the struggle for the Iron Throne, victory came at a price paid in fire and blood, forever etching the horrors of the Dance of the Dragons into the history of Westeros. The dragons, fierce and untamed, were driven into the heart of chaos by their riders amid the brutal clash known as War Unleashed. In the midst of roaring flames and deafening battle cries, these colossal beasts unleashed their raw fury indiscriminately, setting ablaze not only the battlefield but entire sections of the town. Homes, soldiers, and anything unfortunate enough to lie in their path were consumed by fire and destruction. One of the most terrifying elements of this confrontation was the sheer unpredictability of the dragons themselves. Although their riders fought desperately to maintain control, the chaos and terror of battle often pushed these majestic creatures to act on primal instincts beyond anyone's command. The flames swept relentlessly through Duskendale, swallowing whole neighborhoods and leaving behind nothing but smoldering ruins. Innocent civilians trapped in the crossfire suffered immensely, caught between the relentless assault of fire-breathing dragons and the clashing armies below. The devastation was staggering. What had once been a vital and bustling stronghold was reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. For the soldiers fighting on the ground, the spectacle of dragons soaring and dueling in the sky was a mix of awe and horror. These colossal creatures were not only battling each other, but seemed locked in a war against the very forces of nature that had been unleashed upon the world. Their fiery breath ignited the skies, casting an eerie glow on the chaos below, and their mighty roars echoed across the battlefield like thunder. Yet, despite the overwhelming might and terror brought by Aegon Siku's dragons, the battle took an unexpected turn. The forces loyal to Rhaenyra Lord Darkland, though battered and weakened, managed to hold their ground long enough for reinforcements to arrive. These fresh troops, led by some of Rhaenyra's most devoted bannermen, launched a sudden and fierce counterattack on Aegon's forces. The element of surprise proved critical, catching the Greens completely off guard and allowing Rhaenyra's defenders to push back the assault on Duskendale. The role of dragons in this epic conflict cannot be overstated. While the fire and bloodshed they unleashed caused widespread devastation, it was their very presence that ultimately shaped the battle's outcome. Rhaenyra's dragons, though fewer in number, proved to be more strategically decisive. When her forces coordinated an aerial strike against Aegon's armies, the tide of battle shifted dramatically. One defining moment came when a dragon belonging to Aegon was grievously wounded high above Duskendale, just sparking panic among the Greens and forcing a hasty retreat. As the Greens' dominance in the skies waned, their foothold on the ground began to crumble as well. The eventual victory of Rhaenyra's forces at the Bastion of Duskendale was more than a tactical triumph. It carried profound symbolic weight in the greater War of Succession. By holding Duskendale, Rhaenyra solidified her influence over the Crownlands and sent a clear message to Aegon II's supporters. The Blacks remained a force to be reckoned with, even in the face of overwhelming odds. However, the long-term consequences of the battle cast a shadow over this immediate success. The destruction wrought by the dragons left Duskendale in ruins, its people deeply scarred, and its vital infrastructure shattered. A town once central to the Crownland's stability was left in a state of devastation that would take years, if not decades, to fully recover from. Beyond the physical destruction, the Battle of the Bastion of Duskendale foreshadowed a darker future for both sides in the Dance of the Dragons. The relentless use of dragons as instruments of war inflicted untold devastation across Westeros, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately contribute to the downfall of the Targaryen dynasty. In the grand tapestry of this civil war, the battle stands as a stark testament to the brutal nature of the conflict. A war where dragons, once revered as symbols of Targaryen dominance and power, became agents of ruin, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Though Rhaegar's victory strengthened her claim, it also underscored the futility of a war where no true winner could emerge without Westeros itself paying an unbearable price. Shifting away from the grand scale of dragonfire and battlefield carnage, the story next takes us to a smaller yet pivotal moment steeped in wit, cunning, and ruthless efficiency. High in the eerie mountains known as the Moon, Tyrion Lannister found himself on trial, not by armies or weapons, but by combat sanctioned under ancient laws. Here in the shadow of looming peaks, we encounter one of the most morally complex characters in the saga, Bronn. Tyrion, always relying on his sharp mind rather than brute force, was caught in a dire situation. Accused of crimes he did not commit, held prisoner within the fortress of the Eyrie under the vigilant watch of Lady Lysa Arryn, sister to Catelyn Stark, his predicament seemed hopeless. His quick tongue and sharp wit, instead of helping, often made enemies of those around him. Yet when all conventional means failed, Tyrion cleverly invoked an ancient rite, the trial by combat, a desperate gamble that transferred his fate from judge and jury to the edge of a blade. This was no mere legal formality. Trial by combat was a brutal fight to the death, where one's survival depended on the skill and luck of a chosen champion. When called upon to name his champion, Tyrion turned to the only person who might have even the faintest loyalty to him. Bronn, a sellsword with a reputation for achieving results, no matter how grim or unsavory the methods. Bronn harbored no personal loyalty to Tyrion, but he recognized opportunity when he saw it. In a world where gold often bought loyalty, serving a Lannister was a chance too lucrative to ignore. Facing them was Ser Vardis Egen, a Knight of the Vale. Clad in heavy armor and embodying the ideals of chivalry, nobility, and honor, he represented everything the traditionalists of Westeros revered. In stark contrast stood Bronn, the epitome of pragmatism and survival at any cost. He fought not with noble ideals, but with cunning and ruthlessness, wielding whatever tools were necessary to win. As the combatants prepared for battle, the contrast could not have been more striking. Ser Vardis, slow but formidable, relied heavily on the protection his heavy plate armor provided, trusting in his training and strength. Bronn, by contrast, appeared almost casual, dressed in lightweight leather and relying on agility and wit rather than raw power. Their duel was a collision of worlds, the honorable realm of knightly chivalry clashing with the ruthless reality of mercenary survival. The tension was thick in the air, made all the more palpable by Tyrion's uneasy presence, watching as his fate hinged on the deadly dance unfolding before him. From the opening moments, it became clear that Bronn had no interest in engaging Ser Vardis on his terms. He dodged the knight's slow, powerful blows with ease, baiting him into tiring himself out. Each swing of the heavy sword became a growing burden as the weight of the armor slowed Ser Vardis, gradually wearing down his stamina. Bronn's strategy was simple but deadly. Outlast the knight by making him work harder for every strike, then exploit the slowing of his opponent with quick, precise hits. These small but calculated blows chipped away at Ser Vardis' endurance, turning his greatest strengths into vulnerabilities. As the fight dragged on, Ser Vardis' exhaustion became painfully obvious. The very armor that had once made him nearly invincible now hampered his movements, leaving openings that Bronn mercilessly exploited. The duel, a striking study in contrasts, became a lesson in how adaptability and cunning could triumph over brute strength and tradition. Tyrion Lannister's sharp wit and dark humor shone vividly in that tense moment, as he observed the unfolding combat with a detached amusement that belied the gravity of the situation. He had staked everything on the shoulders of Bronn, a man whose fighting style was far from conventional, yet Tyrion's instincts told him he had made the right choice. The contrast between Tyrion's composed demeanor and the mounting desperation evident in Ser Vardis Aegon was nothing short of striking. Here was a nobleman, once proud and confident, now unraveling under pressure, while Tyrion remained the picture of calm assurance. His fate, precariously balanced on the outcome of this brutal contest, hinged on Bronn's success. But his faith in Bronn never wavered. Then came the decisive moment. Bronn, ever the opportunist, seized his chance with ruthless precision. Ser Vardis, exhausted and off balance, left himself exposed for just a fleeting instant, and Bronn, quick as a striking serpent, capitalized on it. Using the knight's own momentum against him, Bronn delivered a lethal strike. Ser Vardis crashed to the ground, defenseless and gasping for breath. Without hesitation, Bronn drove his sword home, ending the fight with a brutal finality that left no room for debate. There was no flourish, no pretense of chivalry, only cold, unvarnished reality. The tension that had gripped the Great Hall evaporated instantly. Bronn had triumphed, but not in the manner the nobility of King's Landing had anticipated. There were no cheers, no expressions of admiration for his skill or bravery, only stunned silence. The old ways of knighthood, with their grand rituals and strict codes of honor, had failed to deliver the expected outcome. In that instant, Bronn became more than just a sellsword. He became a pivotal figure in the deadly political game of Westeros. His loyalty to Tyrion wasn't born from love or respect, but from the clear understanding that Tyrion offered something valuable, a partnership that served both men's survival. For Tyrion, the victory was far more than a temporary reprieve from a death sentence. It was proof of his ability to maneuver through Westeros's treacherous power structures, manipulating ancient traditions for his own advantage. The trial by combat, an institution steeped in centuries of honor and ceremony, had been subverted. Tyrion's victory was not achieved through martial valor, but by choosing a champion who understood the true nature of survival, winning at any cost. Bronn's triumph established him as one of the most unconventional yet effective characters in the saga. He was no knight, nor did he pretend to follow the rigid codes of chivalry that govern noble society. Instead, what he lacked in noble birth and honor, he made up for with cunning, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to adapt to any situation. Symbolically, Bronn's victory over Ser Vardis mirrored the changing tides in Westeros itself, a realm where traditional values were being challenged and new, more pragmatic forces were rising to power. For Tyrion, this trial by combat marked the beginning of a complicated and enduring relationship with Bronn. Their alliance was born not of friendship or mutual trust, but of necessity. Over time, Bronn would repeatedly prove that while he might not be the most honorable ally, he was certainly one of the most dependable when it came to surviving in the perilous world of Westeros. Now, shifting our gaze to a far grander scale, we delve into a conquest that forever altered the very fabric of Westeros, a tale so monumental it still echoes through the annals of the realm's history. This is the story of Aegon the Conqueror, whose dragons, ambition, and vision laid the foundation for the Targaryen dynasty. Long before the infamous Dance of the Dragons or the chaos of the War of the Five Kings, Westeros was a land fractured into multiple independent kingdoms: the Reach, the Stormlands, the Riverlands, the North, and several others, all ruled by their own kings answerable to no higher authority. These lands were locked in a constant struggle for supremacy, their alliances fragile and ever-changing, their battles frequent and brutal. Across the narrow sea, on the volcanic island of Dragonstone, a different kind of power was quietly amassing, not built on knights or castles, but on dragons. The Targaryens, descendants of the ancient Valyrian freehold, had survived the cataclysm known as the Doom of Valyria, and brought with them their most prized and terrifying weapons, dragons. Now, with the fires of ambition burning bright, they set their sights on uniting Westeros under a single rule: Aegon Targaryen, known in legend as Aegon the Conqueror, was no mere regional ruler content to hold Dragonstone. He dreamed of uniting the fractured kingdoms of Westeros, forging an empire that would endure through generations. But Aegon did not arrive with a vast army of men. Instead, he wielded power far more fearsome: dragons. Accompanied by his sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, Aegon brought 3 mighty dragons to Westeros: Balerion, the Black Dread, whose shadow darkened the skies; Meraxes, and Vagar. These were not just beasts, but living forces of destruction, capable of laying waste to entire armies and turning the tides of war with their fiery breath. Aegon understood the true strength these dragons represented and how to wield them with terrifying effectiveness. The first significant opposition to Aegon's conquest came from a coalition between the Kings of the Reach and the Stormlands, 2 powerful realms wary of this foreign invader. King Mern IX of the Reach and King Argyll the Arrogant of the Stormlands forged an alliance, combining their forces in the hope of crushing Aegon's ambitions before they could fully take shape. Confident in their combined might, these kings sought to confront Aegon in open battle, believing that sheer numbers and traditional warfare would end the threat. But Aegon was no ordinary conqueror. He had studied the annals of warfare and knew that brute force alone would not secure victory in Westeros. What set Aegon apart was his ability to rewrite the rules of war, blending the old with the new, and harnessing dragons as unstoppable weapons of mass destruction. Thus began a campaign that would reshape the destiny of Westeros forever, heralding the rise of a new order and the fall of the old. While the armies of the Reach and the Stormlands stood poised in traditional formation, their ranks of infantry and cavalry ready to engage in the brutal clash of steel and shield, Aegon and his sisters soared above on the backs of dragons, creatures of myth and fire that brought an entirely new dimension to warfare. These dragons, with their immense wingspans stretching wide and their fiery breath capable of incinerating all in its path, were unleashed in full force upon the battlefield. What unfolded on that day came to be known as the Field of Fire, a moment so unprecedented in the history of Westeros that its echoes would reverberate for generations. As the 2 great armies collided beneath the sky, Aegon and his sisters descended like harbingers of destruction. Dragonfire rained down, engulfing the forces of the Reach and Stormlands in roaring flames that consumed flesh and melted armor alike. The battlefield transformed into a hellscape where fire devoured men and metal with equal ferocity, leaving nothing but smoldering ruin in its wake. The power of the dragons was overwhelming, so devastating that it instantly shifted the momentum of the battle. What had begun as a confident alliance between 2 mighty kings swiftly crumbled into chaos and retreat. King Mern IX of the Reach, a formidable leader, perished in the Inferno along with a great portion of his army. The once proud forces were shattered by the Targaryen dragons, and those who survived fled in disarray. Meanwhile, King Aelak of the Stormlands, witnessing the hopelessness of continued resistance, attempted to rally his men, but his efforts were in vain. Aegon's victory was total, his dragons having broken the combined might of the Reach and Stormlands in a single cataclysmic confrontation. This battle was not merely a military engagement, it was the first great test of Aegon's ambitious conquest, setting a grim tone for the campaigns that would follow. Never before had Westeros witnessed such destruction wrought by dragons, living weapons of unimaginable power. The sight of entire armies reduced to ash and cinders sent shockwaves across the continent, forever altering the art of war. Yet, Aegon's triumph was not only a demonstration of brute force. He understood that wielding dragons was not enough to secure his rule. To truly unify Westeros, he would need to command loyalty, not just fear. Following his decisive victory at the Field of Fire, Aegon turned toward diplomacy. He extended an offer to the lords of Westeros: bend the knee, swear fealty to him, and in return receive peace, security, and stability under his reign. Many, recognizing the futility of opposition, accepted this new order. The once mighty House Gardener, rulers of the Reach for centuries, was extinguished in the flames, replaced by House Tyrell, a loyal supporter of Aegon. The arrogant King Aelak of the Stormlands died soon after the battle, and the region passed firmly into the hands of Aegon's allies. Aegon's victory was far more than a battlefield success. It marked a turning point in Westeros' history. The independent kings of the realm became lords sworn to the Iron Throne, a symbol forged from the swords of Aegon's defeated enemies. While the dragons were instruments of conquest, the Iron Throne stood as the enduring emblem of his authority and legacy. Under Aegon's unifying hand, the fractured kingdoms ceased their endless wars, ushering in an era of relative peace and centralized governance that Westeros had never known before. This unification profoundly shifted the continent's balance of power. No longer would petty kings wage ceaseless battles over land and title. Instead, lords maintained their influence, but within the framework of loyalty to a single monarch. The conquest was not just a military revolution, but a societal one, an epoch where the old ways of warfare, relying on knights, horses, and foot soldiers, gave way to a new age defined by dragons and fire. Aegon's rule inaugurated the Targaryen dynasty, which would endure for nearly 3 centuries, shaping Westeros through fire and blood. The Field of Fire was more than a clash of armies. It was the birth of legend. Aegon himself transcended his mortal role, becoming a figure of myth whose descendants would reign from the Iron Throne, wielding dragons as both symbols of power and tools of control. This first great victory sealed his claim and irrevocably changed the course of Westerosi history. Shifting now to the frozen north, we come to another pivotal conflict, the Battle of Winterfell. Here, the fate of one of the most complex and tragic figures in Westerosi lore was sealed, Stannis Baratheon. This battle between Stannis and the Boltons in the bitter cold of the north marked the end of Stannis' doomed campaign for the Iron Throne, cementing the brutal Bolton hold over Winterfell. It was a grim chapter of desperation, betrayal, and harsh consequences for the future of the North. Stannis Baratheon, a man defined by his rigid resolve and unshakable belief in his own destiny, claimed himself the rightful heir after the death of his brother, King Robert Baratheon. The revelation that Robert's supposed heirs with Queen Cersei were in fact born of incest only strengthened his conviction. Yet despite his claims and steely determination, Stannis' quest was marred by setbacks and increasingly desperate choices. By the time Stannis set his sights on Winterfell, his campaign was faltering. His failed siege of King's Landing had sapped his strength. In the north, the looming threat of the White Walkers added a new urgency to his cause. Upon arriving at the Wall, Stannis offered his support to the Night's Watch, hoping to forge alliances. His critical decision to march on Winterfell stemmed from the belief that reclaiming the ancestral seat of the North would rally the Northern Lords to his banner, bolstering his claim and reinforcing his position in the impending struggle for the realm. This battle, fought amidst snow and ice, would prove decisive, not just for Stannis' ambitions, but for the fate of the North itself. But this decision was driven by sheer desperation, born from the relentless erosion of Stannis Baratheon's forces and the merciless grip of the northern winter. His army, already worn down by months of hardship, faced brutal weather conditions that seemed almost designed to crush any hope of victory. Snow piled deep, winds howled like banshees, and temperatures plunged to unforgiving lows, each day draining the strength and spirit of his soldiers. Meanwhile, the Boltons had firmly entrenched themselves within the ancient walls of Winterfell. Their grip on the castle was unyielding, bolstered by a sizable force that outnumbered Stannis' troops many times over. They held the home advantage, familiar with the terrain, and ready to defend their hard-won territory. The threat was stark, and the odds were anything but in Stannis' favor. As the days edged closer to confrontation, the desperation within Stannis' camp became increasingly visible. His campaign was unraveling rapidly. Supplies that were once sufficient had dwindled to near nothing. Food, weapons, and even basic comforts became scarce. His soldiers, beaten down by the cold and constant struggle, grew demoralized, their once steely resolve fading beneath layers of frost and despair. Support from his allies wavered as whispers of impending defeat spread like wildfire. Then came the darkest and most haunting moment of all. In a final chilling act urged by Melisandre, the Red Priestess who had long been his most devoted and enigmatic supporter, Stannis made a choice that would stain his name forever. He sacrificed his own daughter, Shireen. This cruel act, intended to invoke the favor and fiery power of the Lord of Light, was meant to turn the tides of the war, to ignite hope where none remained. Instead, it shattered whatever fragile morale lingered among his troops. The death of innocent Shireen fractured the faith his followers held in him. Even Melisandre, witnessing the hopelessness of their cause, abandoned Stannis at his darkest hour. As Stannis' battered army trudged through the unrelenting snow toward Winterfell, they were met by a foe not only more numerous but strategically superior. Ramsay Bolton, the sadistic and cunning leader of the Bolton forces, wielded his advantage with ruthless efficiency. Employing brutal guerrilla tactics, Ramsay's men harassed Stannis' weary soldiers relentlessly, picking them apart with hit-and-run attacks designed to weaken and demoralize the already starving and frostbitten troops. Each step closer to Winterfell was a march deeper into despair. By the time Stannis' forces finally reached the gates of Winterfell, they had ceased to be a cohesive army. What remained was a shattered collection of survivors, some barely able to stand, all exhausted and hopeless. The ensuing battle was swift and merciless. Stannis, ever the soldier and commander, fought valiantly, determined to stand his ground despite the overwhelming odds. But the sheer size and ferocity of the Bolton forces quickly crushed any chance of success. His tactical genius, honed over many campaigns, proved no match for the relentless onslaught and home field advantage the Boltons wielded. As his men fell around him, Stannis refused to surrender or retreat, clinging fiercely to his belief that he was the rightful king, destined to claim the Iron Throne. Yet determination alone was not enough. Isolated, surrounded, and with his army decimated, Stannis faced the inevitable. His final moments came at the hands of Brienne of Tarth, a knight bound by honor and vengeance. Sworn to avenge the death of Renly Baratheon, Stannis' younger brother, Brienne found the fallen king wounded and defenseless. In this quiet, somber moment, Stannis accepted his fate. Brienne carried out her grim duty swiftly and without hesitation, ending the life of one of Westeros' most tragic and complex figures. Stannis' defeat at Winterfell sent shockwaves throughout the north and beyond. With him gone, his claim to the Iron Throne extinguished, the Bolton hold over Winterfell grew unchallenged. Ramsay Bolton, infamous for his cruelty and savage tactics, solidified his role as the undisputed warden of the North. The Northern Lords, fractured by years of war and wary of open rebellion, reluctantly accepted Bolton rule, even as tales of Ramsay's brutality spread like wildfire. This victory had dire consequences for the resistance against the Lannisters. With Stannis' campaign crushed and his forces obliterated, no significant northern power remained to rally the scattered lords under a common banner. The hope of reclaiming Winterfell for House Stark seemed lost, as the Boltons, legitimized by the Lannisters, tightened their grip through fear and terror. Yet, beneath the surface of Bolton dominance, cracks began to show. Ramsay's savage and unstable rule alienated many of the northern nobles who had grown tired of his merciless tactics. While their power appeared complete, it was fragile, resting on the unstable foundation of fear rather than loyalty. The legacy of House Stark lingered in the hearts of many northerners. The memory of Ned Stark's honor, the long history of Stark rule over Winterfell, was not so easily erased. Stannis' fall symbolized more than just a failed campaign. It marked the death of a man who believed himself destined to save the realm. His rigid belief in his own righteousness and his readiness to sacrifice even his family ultimately led to his downfall. Though the battle at Winterfell was swift and brutal, it signified the collapse of Stannis' ambitions and the final failure of his claim to the Iron Throne. Yet the story of that icy battlefield would reverberate through the north for seasons to come. The Boltons had won the day, but the seeds of their own undoing had been planted, and the Stark legacy, once thought lost, would rise again, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Now, turning to another pivotal conflict, the Siege of Meereen stood as a battle that tested not only raw power, but strategic prowess and alliances. For Daenerys Targaryen, the Mother of Dragons, it was a defining moment, a test of her evolving military acumen and leadership. The siege was more than a fight for control. It was a crucial step toward consolidating her rule and propelling her closer to the Iron Throne. When Daenerys first arrived in Meereen, she came as a liberator, having already freed the cities of Astapor and Yunkai from the shackles of slavery. Yet Meereen was the jewel of Slaver's Bay, a prize far more formidable and essential to her campaign. Seizing this city meant solidifying her influence and demonstrating her ability to govern and protect the oppressed, establishing a base from which she could expand her reach across Westeros and beyond. However, this hard-won victory was far from a simple triumph. It came with its own set of grave challenges. The former slavers, known infamously as the Masters, harbored a deep and burning resentment toward her bold abolition of slavery. This bitter grudge drove them to forge an uneasy but dangerous alliance with the remaining free cities of Yunkai and Astapor. Together, these factions sought to reclaim what they had lost, their grip on power and control over the region's vital resources. The Masters devised a ruthless plan to lay siege to Meereen, a strategic city that had become the heart of her growing dominion. By blockading the harbor, they aimed to choke off the city's lifelines, severing critical supply routes and cutting off reinforcements. Their forces threatened to overwhelm the city's defenses from the sea, hoping to starve the defenders into submission. This siege was not merely a military operation, but a desperate gamble to restore the old order that had been shattered by her revolution. As the siege tightened, the situation inside Meereen grew increasingly dire. The city's people faced starvation, dwindling supplies, and mounting despair. To make matters worse, internal strife festered beneath the surface. The Sons of the Harpy, shadowy insurgents loyal to the old ways and the vanquished Masters, launched relentless guerrilla attacks from within. Their violent actions sought to destabilize the fragile peace she had fought so hard to establish, turning Meereen into a city under siege from both outside and within. In this critical moment of crisis, her reliance on trusted advisors became more apparent than ever. Tyrion Lannister, now a key figure in Meereen's administration, stepped up to fill the void when she was forced to leave. After an earlier attack, she had taken flight atop her dragon, Drogon, seeking safety and reconnaissance. Meanwhile, Tyrion wielded his formidable political skills to maintain order, negotiate with the other cities, and buy precious time. Yet, despite his efforts, it was clear the Masters were resolute. Negotiations could only delay an inevitable and brutal clash. The true turning point came with her dramatic return, riding Drogon through the skies above a weary and battered Meereen. The city's defenders, demoralized and worn thin by months of siege, found renewed hope and courage in the sight of their queen's arrival. The Masters had gravely underestimated the force they were up against. As the slaver fleet maintained its blockade, the dragons took to the air. Drogon, along with Rhaegal and Viserion, unleashed a devastating fiery assault that tore through the enemy ships, engulfing them in flames and throwing the blockade into chaos. While the dragon's ferocious power decimated the fleet, victory was not secured by brute force alone. Understanding the importance of diplomacy alongside strength, she summoned the surviving Masters to a fateful meeting. Her message was unmistakable. There would be no mercy for those who betrayed her and attacked the city. After a stern demonstration of her authority, she executed 2 of the 3 Masters present, sparing one only to send a chilling warning to the rest of Slaver's Bay. Resistance was futile, and any further defiance would be met with fire and blood. On the ground, her loyal forces played equally vital roles in securing the city. Grey Worm, commander of the Unsullied, led a meticulous counter-offensive within Meereen's walls, systematically rooting out the Sons of the Harpy and restoring order. His disciplined and precise tactics ensured that the internal insurgency was crushed. Beyond the city, Daario Naharis commanded the Dothraki cavalry with relentless ferocity, leading devastating charges that shattered the remaining forces loyal to the Masters. Throughout this turbulent time, Tyrion's political savvy proved just as critical as the dragon's might. While the spectacle of dragons raining fire struck fear into enemies, it was Tyrion's management of Meereen's fragile internal politics that prevented the city from descending into chaos. Balancing the needs of freedmen and the wary citizenry alike, his efforts maintained stability during the city's darkest hours. The victory at Meereen was not merely a triumph on the battlefield. It was a milestone that solidified her claim as a true leader capable of holding and defending what she had conquered. The alliances forged with the Dothraki, the Unsullied, and Tyrion laid the foundation for a larger campaign toward the Iron Throne. These were not just soldiers in an army, but fiercely loyal allies who had witnessed her leadership through both fire and strategy. The significance of this victory cannot be overstated. By breaking the siege and crushing the Master's forces, she cemented her role not only as a conqueror, but as a protector of the people she had freed. The Masters, once rulers of vast swaths of Slaver's Bay, were decisively defeated, their ambitions in ruins. The dragons had returned to their rightful place in the skies, a symbol of Targaryen power both feared and revered across the land. The siege of Meereen also marked a pivotal shift in her leadership style. Where once she had been a liberator focused on tearing down old systems, this battle revealed her capacity to govern and defend. Her use of overwhelming force, paired with calculated mercy, demonstrated a balance between ruthlessness and justice, a hallmark that would define her rule in the years to come. Ultimately, Meereen became more than just another conquest. It stood as a symbol of her ability not only to seize cities, but to protect and inspire loyalty within them. It was a testament to her strength as a leader who could command both fear and devotion, and a crucial step on her journey toward Westeros and the Iron Throne, where her destiny awaited. Turning now to a different chapter in the annals of Targaryen history, we delve into one of the most climactic moments of the Dance of the Dragons, a brutal conflict that reshaped the very fabric of Westeros. The Battle of the Gold Road was a bloody, pivotal confrontation between the forces of Aegon II and Rhaenyra Targaryen, marking a decisive turning point in their bitter civil war and signaling the slow unraveling of House Targaryen's power. Though this particular battle has yet to be fully depicted in popular retellings, such as House of the Dragon, it looms large as one of the most dramatic and consequential events of the conflict, destined to take center stage as the saga unfolds. Set during the Dance of the Dragons, a brutal civil war between rival Targaryen factions, the Battle of the Gold Road took place when the war was nearing its breaking point. Aegon II, backed by his loyalists, was locked in a savage struggle against his half-sister, Rhaenyra, who also laid claim to the Iron Throne. While many battles had already scarred the land, the clash at the Gold Road stood out not only for the scale of destruction, but for the stakes involved in deciding the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. But because of the devastating power wielded by dragons and the severe political upheaval it triggered, the Dance of the Dragons stands apart in Westerosi history for the unprecedented number of dragons unleashed in warfare. The Targaryens, descendants of the ancient dragon lords of Valyria, still commanded these magnificent fire-breathing creatures. Both Aegon II and Rhaenyra Targaryen brought dragons into the fray, utilizing their terrifying might to conduct war on a scale and with a ferocity never before seen in the realm. At the Gold Road, this conflict reached a catastrophic climax. Aegon II, determined to cement his claim to the Iron Throne and crush his sister Rhaenyra's challenge once and for all, led his forces to intercept hers along this vital supply artery near King's Landing. The Gold Road was more than just a path. It was a lifeline, a strategic conduit that allowed armies, provisions, and communication to flow between the capital and the western regions of the kingdom. Control over this critical junction meant control over the fate of the war itself. The battle that erupted there was as brutal as it was monumental. Despite earlier injuries, Aegon's dragon, Sunfire, remained a formidable presence in the skies, unleashing torrents of flame that turned the battlefield into a hellscape of burning flesh and shattered armor. At his side stood Sir Criston Cole, the king's most trusted military commander who led the ground troops with ruthless discipline. On the opposing side, Rhaenyra's forces consisted of her most loyal supporters, unwavering in their resolve to break Aegon's grip on the throne. The clash quickly devolved into chaos. Infantry engaged in desperate combat below as dragons tore across the sky in deadly duels. The air was thick with smoke and ash as dragonfire rained down, consuming men, horses, and entire companies. The dragons themselves fought viciously, their talons and flames turning the heavens into a battleground as fearsome and volatile as the one on the ground. The carnage was immense. Both sides suffered devastating losses, yet it was Aegon II's forces, buoyed by Sunfire's relentless assault and Sir Criston Cole's unyielding leadership, that ultimately seized victory. This defeat at the Gold Road was a severe blow to Rhaenyra's cause, weakening her position and granting Aegon the advantage he so desperately sought. The immediate consequences were profound. Aegon II's triumph fortified his claim to the throne, while Rhaenyra's military strength was severely diminished. Many of her commanders and dragons were lost, either slain or captured, making it increasingly difficult for her to continue her challenge. However, the long-term ramifications extended far beyond the battlefield. Though Aegon II emerged victorious, the war irreparably shattered House Targaryen. The widespread use of dragons in such destructive capacity left the realm scarred and smoldering, with entire towns and regions reduced to ashes. The once unified Targaryen dynasty fractured under the strain of war, losing countless family members and dragons alike. The terrifying spectacle of dragonfire, once a symbol of Targaryen majesty and power, now inspired fear and resentment among the common folk. The destruction bred unrest, and the once glorious reputation of House Targaryen began to crumble, planting the seeds of its eventual decline. The dragons in the Dance of the Dragons were a double-edged sword. They gave the Targaryens unmatched power, but also wrought devastation that weakened the realm and tore their family apart. Both Aegon and Rhaenyra paid a heavy toll in dragons and kin, leaving House Targaryen fractured and vulnerable in the war's aftermath. Though the Battle of the Gold Road was a milestone victory for Aegon II, it came at a great cost, one that would echo through the years, leading to the slow unraveling of the dynasty. As the Dance of the Dragons drew to a close, the once mighty dragons began to disappear, and with their loss, so too faded the Targaryens' unchallenged dominion. For fans of House of the Dragon, the battle at the Gold Road, if not yet depicted, will undoubtedly be a highlight of the series. The show has already brought many pivotal moments of the Dance of the Dragons to life, and this brutal confrontation promises to vividly portray the chaos and destruction wrought by dragon warfare. It is a battle that showcases not only the terrifying power of these creatures, but also the tragic consequences of a Targaryen civil war that nearly tore Westeros apart. Few conflicts in Game of Thrones capture the intensity and raw emotion quite like the Battle of Castle Black. More than a mere fight between armies, it was a desperate struggle for survival against overwhelming odds, a crucible that tested the leadership of Jon Snow and shaped the fate of the North and all of Westeros. The defense of the Wall against the wildlings was a testament to Jon's evolution as a leader. It highlighted his ability to inspire the beleaguered Night's Watch, rallying a group of disparate men against a ferocious and numerically superior enemy. The tension leading up to the battle was palpable. Jon, once an outsider within the Night's Watch, had gradually earned respect through courage and an unwavering sense of duty. Yet his experiences among the wildlings, especially his romantic relationship with Ygritte, complicated his loyalties and weighed heavily on his heart. Jon's mission had begun as a reconnaissance effort, an infiltration of the wildling camp to gather intelligence. But he had come to understand their plight. These were not ruthless invaders, but desperate souls fleeing the brutal winter and the inexorable advance of the White Walkers. Nevertheless, as a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, Jon was duty-bound to defend the Wall. The wildling forces, led by the fierce and charismatic Mance Rayder, presented a terrifying challenge. Their army was vast and varied, including giants and mammoths alongside seasoned fighters. Against them, the Night's Watch was stretched thin and underprepared, composed largely of raw recruits and men with checkered pasts. The wildlings employed a cunning two-pronged assault, simultaneously attacking the southern gate and scaling the wall itself, a tactical nightmare that forced Jon and his brothers to defend multiple fronts. Despite the dire circumstances, Jon's leadership shone. Though young and relatively inexperienced, he quickly took command, issuing clear, decisive orders and inspiring his men with personal bravery. He understood that if the wall fell, it would mean the collapse of the realm's first and last line of defense against the White Walkers. One of the battle's most harrowing moments came when wildlings brought the giants and mammoths to bear against the wall's gates. The sheer might of these colossal creatures threatened to break through the defenses, and the Night's Watch fought desperately to hold the line. The battle escalated into a chaotic, multi-front melee, pushing Jon and his brothers to their limits. Amid the turmoil, Jon was forced to confront his feelings for Ygritte. When she appeared as part of the wildling assault, their brief reunion was heartbreaking. Ygritte hesitated as she drew her bow to shoot Jon, torn between love and loyalty. In that moment of hesitation, she was struck down by an arrow from a Night's Watchman. Cradling her in his arms, Jon heard her final words echo hauntingly. "You know nothing, Jon Snow." Her death was a personal wound that would haunt him long after the battle ended. Despite relentless pressure, Jon's leadership and the courage of the Night's Watch turned the tide. He personally led a pivotal charge to defend the inner gate, employing every resource available, including the giant scythe-like weapons to cut down wildlings climbing the wall. The attackers were finally repelled, and Castle Black held firm. The victory came at a heavy cost. Many brothers had fallen, and the Night's Watch was left severely weakened. Yet the battle marked a turning point. Jon's valor earned him the respect of even his harshest critics, proving he was far more than the bastard son of Eddard Stark. He was a leader forged in the fires of war. Politically, the aftermath was significant. Jon's triumph secured the wall and elevated him to the position of Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, placing him at the forefront of the looming war against the White Walkers. His actions also set the stage for a tentative alliance with the wildlings, a controversial but vital step toward survival, recognizing that the real enemy was not the wildlings themselves, but the undead that threatened all of Westeros. The Battle of Castle Black symbolizes Jon Snow's transformation from a boy searching for identity into a leader willing to sacrifice everything for the realm's survival. It underscored the growing menace of the White Walkers and cemented the Night's Watch as the critical shield between the living world and annihilation. Though victorious, the battle was a stark reminder. The true war had only just begun. The coming winter and the March of the Dead promised even greater challenges, with Jon Snow poised at the heart of the struggle for Westeros' fate.